The French Revolution. I guess if I were you, the viewer, and I had no idea what the French Revolution was about, I'd want to observe historical briefing. But first, you need to know France's social structure at the time. There was the First Estate, the Second Estate, and the Third Estate. Again, no clue what these are. So I'm going to explain each one to you. First of all is the First Estate. These were the priests, nuns, monks, bishops, the religious leaders. The Second Estate were the nobility, owned 40% of the land, and included the captains, dukes and duchesses, and so on. The Third Estate were the doctors, lawyers, commoners, generally everyone else. So, now that that is covered, we can move on to the general timeline of the French Revolution. 1774, King Louis XVI was coronated. 1778, France started the American Revolution, one of the reasons why they went bankrupt. 1788, the States General was called after more than a century. 1789, January through May, the preparation of the meeting of the States General, some of which didn't want to meet with the Third Estate. June 17th, the National Assembly was created. June 20th, the Tennis Court Oath was made and taken. July 13th, the National Guard was formed. July 14th, the storming and or the fall of the Bastille, officially known as the beginning of the French Revolution. July 17th, the Great Fear, where many of the people died via guillotine, and peasants were verbally against feudalism. August 5th to 11th, the National Assembly decrees the abolition of feudalism, equality of taxation, and the sale of offices. October 5th to 6th, the women marched to Versailles to bring back King Louis XVI, and 1793, King Louis XVI was executed. All of this will be elaborated on, but the main thing to take away from this is that 1. King Louis XVI was reigning during that time. The calling of the States General, the National Assembly, and the Tennis Court Oath. The fall of the Bastille, and the Great Fear and feudalism. The three main causes of the French Revolution that I see is the governmental and economical system, the people's realization, basically the Enlightenment and the Scientific Revolution, and the States General. First off was the governmental and economical system. At the time, France was unbelievably poor, mainly caused by the 7-Year War and the American Revolution, explained later. Because of this, King Louis XVI decided to do what is called regressive taxing. Now you may be wondering, what is regressive taxing? There are three main taxing systems: regressive, progressive, and proportional. Regressive taxing is where the lower classes are taxed more heavily than higher classes. In this context, the Third Estate was the only one being taxed, and the first two estates weren't taxed at all. Then there's progressive taxing, and it's basically the opposite of regressive taxing, where the higher classes are taxed more heavily. Proportional taxing is basically when all classes are taxed the same percentage. Then there's feudalism. Feudalism is basically when the First and Second Estate rule over the Third Estate. The Third Estate worked on their land, and they could do what is called convey, basically another word for slavery, which obviously made them mad, thus leading them to revolting. Next is the people's realization, basically in the forms of the Scientific Revolution and the Enlightenment. The Scientific Revolution is exactly what it sounds like. It was when many scientific discoveries made by now famous scientists Isaac Newton, Galileo Galilei, Copernicus, and many more were made. These newfound discoveries contradicted the ones of religion, thus meaning more and more people betrayed their religious beliefs. Then we have the Enlightenment. It's basically when philosophers such as Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau took action by sharing their views on society with everyone. These two historical periods really affected the build-up towards the French Revolution through mental and spiritual ways. Finally, there's the States General, and this is where the issue really blew up and ignited action in the more formal and authoritative peoples. The States General was basically the closest thing France had to a government at the time. The Third Estate, Second Estate, and First Estate made up the States General. The thing was, most of them were dead and had to be replaced because they haven't met in over a century. The other thing was that they didn't really have any power. They could only advise the king, and the king didn't really have to listen to anyone. This is due to what is called the divine right of kings, basically meaning that the king didn't have to listen to anyone but God. One last problem of the States General was the voting system. Each estate got one vote. The thing was, the Third Estate was 97% of the population. and they soon realized that they would always be outvoted by the first two estates. Everyone was probably thinking of this, but no one really did anything, nor did anyone say anything, not until Emmanuel Joseph Sayes, who wrote one of the most important documents of all time. What is the Third Estate? And all it was this. What is the Third Estate? Everything. What has it been until now in the political order? Nothing. What does it want to be? Something. Someone was finally saying something, giving them a reason to do something. And they did. They left the States General and decided to meet by themselves. King Louis tried to stop them by locking the doors to their meeting place. Obviously that didn't work, and they met in a tennis court and took what was called the tennis court oath, basically swearing to keep meeting until the king listened to what they had to say about the situation. Initially, the king refused to do anything for them, but eventually gave in. But then he decides to fire someone who actually supports the Third Estate and replace him with a second estate member. Not a good idea. But that's not it. He also hired Swiss and German troops, and I don't know if you know this, but the French didn't sit kindly with the Germans. Because of said troops and authoritative figures, people started to riot, which led to the formation of the National Guard, which was not only made up of the Third Estate, but people of the Second Estate as well. Thing was, they had weapons, but no ammo. Lucky for them, they knew exactly where to get it, which is from the Bastille, a royal fortress that symbolized the cruelty and tormenting the Third Estate received from the king and the higher people. Thus, the storm of the Bastille symbolized getting back at said higher authorities. A huge reason why the storming at the Bastille marked the official beginning of the French Revolution. Now that you're aware of some of the causes of the French Revolution, I want to talk about some ways the French Revolution could have been prevented. Technically 3 ways. Number 1 would be less influence in wars. That covers 2 huge historical events. Number 2 would be changing the taxing system at the time. And number 3 would be showing more support to the Third Estate. For number 1, the 2 major historical events would be the 7-Year War and the American Revolution. During the 7-Year War, the main problem that affected the French Revolution would be the price of the warships, which at the time was one of the most expensive vessels there was. This means that France spent tons of money for the war, and then ended up losing. As for the American Revolution, France decided to fund for the US during their revolution, but the US didn't pay them back. So, yet another painful blow to France's economy. Next, we have France's taxing system at the time. As mentioned before, France did what was called regressive taxing. To recap, regressive taxing is when the poor is taxed heavier than the rich. This, mentioned before as well, really sparked anger at the Third Estate, amongst other things, obviously. And thus, if the taxing system were, say, proportional taxing, the Third Estate would have one less reason to revolt. However, I believe the most fair thing France, or really any form of society, could do when it comes to taxing would be to do proportional taxing, but with a few tweaks. The following is a simple example of what I'm trying to say. If the higher classes had $3 and the lower classes had $2, food being $1 and education $1, then the higher classes can afford both food and education with or without tax. On the other hand, the lower classes can only afford food and education without tax. With tax, they wouldn't have enough money to afford both of them. I propose a simple solution to this dilemma. If the prices of food and education were higher for the higher classes and lower for the lower classes, then everything would be fine and dandy. Now for the third and final prevention on my list is for the king and the country as a whole to show more support for the Third Estate by hiring more people who are fond of the Third Estate rather than what he did before, as mentioned before, which, if you remember, caused people to riot and formed the National Guard, leading to them storming the Bastille and so on. Therefore, if King Louis XVI were to instead hire more pro-Third Estate people, the Third Estate would have one less reason to revolt. This would also cause the king to not need any fortifying of Paris by German and or Swiss troops. So it's like hitting 2 birds with 1 stone. Now there are plenty of other ways the French Revolution could have been prevented, like so, as well as reasons for why it was caused, like so. But for the sake of your sanity, I'm gonna cut it here, and this is the end.